I always thought betrayal was something that happened to other people, until I found out my wife was carrying another man's child. The day I discovered her affair, my world shattered. It wasn't just about losing her. It was about losing the future I thought was ours. I stood there, fists clenched, as the man she claimed to love more than me smirked in the courtroom. I knew then that I wasn't just fighting for my marriage, I was fighting for my sanity. And the worst part? I never saw it coming. Everyone has a moment in their life when they realize the world isn't as simple as they thought. Many people don't see how much things are about to change. Some go through life without ever noticing this shift. I was lucky to have a father who taught me to be aware of my surroundings. Because of that, I learned to notice things that others missed. Looking back, I can see how much that time shaped my future. As a teenager, I didn't appreciate how much my parents protected me from the tough parts of life. I didn't know that soon I would lose my childhood innocence. My understanding changed because of a decision made by a Mexican-American female judge. Looking at things from her perspective, I learned how someone could ignore what was in front of them due to their beliefs. Until then, I thought everyone acted fairly, and that the truth would always be acknowledged. It was hard to grasp that someone could be biased because of their outlook. During a 3-day court trial, I saw that facts don't always matter. What counted was how those facts were presented and who was listening. If the right person believed the information, it could change everything. I learned this lesson the hard way, and it made me mature quickly. The advice my father shared with me began to make sense. He always said that when things got tough, you could only rely on yourself. I really understood that during those 3 days, especially concerning our family dynamics. What I witnessed opened my eyes to the truth of his words. I felt like I aged years in just a short time. The judge's decision was influenced by a long-term situation involving my mother and my 2 older sisters. They had created conflict that led to the events of the trial. By the time I figured out what was happening, it was already too late. My father thought my concerns were unfounded. He often said that little problems only appeared serious if you chose to see them that way. He believed many theories came from misunderstandings. When he eventually learned about my mother's affair, everything changed. Her lover revealed secrets after some drinks, and my father began to realize I had been warning him the whole time. Sadly, it was too late for him to grasp the truth fully. At that moment, I didn't understand the impact on my father. It took years for me to appreciate his feelings. He had believed the baby my mother was carrying was his. During the confrontation, he must have been experiencing a whirlwind of emotions. It was likely a deep shock for him. He had been excited about raising a child, and now his world was turned upside down. At that moment, he couldn't believe the truth about the man he was facing, thinking he was defending his family's honor. It crushed him when my mother had to confess in court. That moment is one I will always remember. Throughout the trial, the prosecution tried hard to suggest my father knew about the affair. I thought his lawyer did a good job defending him, but the judge didn't believe him. My father's lawyer even asked me to speak about my conversations with my dad. Despite my testimony, the judge found my father guilty, saying he must have known about the relationship through what I told him. I felt guilty for speaking the truth. At the gathering that night, people had to call the police to stop a fight. They were worried that my father might seriously hurt my mother's lover, who acted arrogantly. The lover ended up hurt and had to leave in an ambulance after challenging my father. The police thought my father had an advantage because of his military background, so they ended up arresting him. The prosecutor highlighted his past training to bolster their case. By the time everything calmed down, my father was facing 5 to 10 years in prison for attacking someone. He didn't use any weapons, just his fists. Watching the woman judge during the trial and listening to the prosecutor made me feel really bad. I learned that the court system isn't always fair. Even in the best courts, personal opinions can overshadow the truth. It was hard to accept that someone deciding the case could be influenced by their own beliefs. The sentence seemed very harsh to me, especially given the situation. 7 years for a first-time offense felt excessive. As the sheriff put handcuffs on my dad to take him back to his cell, he looked at me and said, Always trust your instincts, no matter what others say. I should have listened to you. I love you, son. Keep an eye out for the appeal. Remember, a wise person makes their own choices, while someone less wise follows what everyone else thinks. The judge's decision shows that. I could tell he felt wronged, and so did I. My dad's lawyer told me he got assigned to the worst possible judge. The lawyer thought she might not like men and even suggested that she might be biased because of my dad's race, given the kinds of cases she usually handled. He mentioned he would start an appeal, but it would take time. That night when I got home, I heard my mom telling my sisters that she planned to go ahead with a divorce. Now that my dad was going to be away for a while, she felt like she could take control. She believed that within 6 months, she and her partner could start a new life together without my dad having much to his name. At the time, I didn't know that Missouri law meant everything would be divided equally. Later that night, just before bed, my sisters tried to convince me to accept what happened. They seemed to think that because I was younger, I wouldn't understand the seriousness of it all. They spoke to me like I was a child, as if I couldn't grasp anything. During a long conversation, I began to see that people often only recognize what they want to see. Many will twist things to make themselves look better, even if that isn't the truth. If you bring up uncomfortable truths, be ready for pushback. What they were saying didn't match what I had seen. None of us realized how much this talk would shape our relationship as siblings in the future. Their perspective was one-sided and not how I saw things, but it inspired a choice I would make later. I noticed how my sisters would twist my dad's words into something negative. So when they asked me what I thought, I said nothing. I expected them to challenge me, but they didn't seem to notice. I realized I was outnumbered and needed to keep my feelings to myself. As I listened, it felt like they were trying to explain their actions as mere accidents, almost like they had no choice. They claimed that others misunderstood them. I could see through their excuses, which sounded like lies aimed at downplaying their involvement to feel better. What they didn't know was that I had overheard many conversations between them and our mom when our dad was away. I had been keeping a record of what they said in my room every night. After my sisters confronted our mom about her affair, my notes filled up with their words, along with my reactions. I would always remember that first talk, as I saw how my mom managed to get my sisters on her side. Before then, I hadn't realized that actions and words could influence people so powerfully. That night, I decided it was best for me to move on with my life. I couldn't accept the false image they wanted me to believe. My dad always said that if you can't accept someone's behavior, it might be best to step away. I didn't know how significant that step would be. I took out the sports equipment that my dad had bought for me, hidden under my bed. Then I filled my sports bag with clothes, leaving behind some things I cherished because I didn't have room for them. I didn't realize how big of a choice I was making at the time, but that one act changed what I thought was important for the rest of my life. After looking at my journal entries from the past 18 months, I wrote a long summary of everything I had seen with my mother. I wanted to explain why I was leaving, so I placed the letter on my unmade bed the next morning. What I wrote made it clear why I felt this way. In the letter, I said I saw my mother and my sister as people who lied and took advantage of others. I packed 6 logbooks into my sports bag. After breakfast, with everyone out of the house for the day, I went to the bank when it opened and took most of the money from my savings account. I was grateful my father had made me work part-time at his store over the years. I went to another bank nearby and bought a prepaid debit card. Before leaving town, I visited my father in jail one last time. When I told him my plans, he understood I had made up my mind. He wished me well, telling me to be careful. He reminded me that if I ever needed help or was in trouble, I could call him. I reassured him that I had enough money to last me a while. When he asked about taking the car he bought me, I said no, as it could be traced back to him. With tears in his eyes, he nodded and said, "Promise me you will keep learning and stay away from trouble." Once I got to the edge of town, I began hitchhiking and didn't look back. Since it was the start of summer vacation, I headed northwest. After reaching St. Louis, I bought a train ticket to Seattle. I planned it this way so that it would be harder for anyone to find me. I picked Seattle because of how it was being talked about in the news. It was known as a progressive city, and I thought the local authorities wouldn't be looking for a runaway like me. Later, I would see that I had made the right choice. I worked as a department manager in the automotive section of a Costco store in Bellingham, Washington, while I continued my education online. I had finally earned my general equivalency diploma, and my future looked bright. It had been 5 years since I left home, and I had plans to celebrate my 22nd birthday with something special. 2 years earlier, the store manager had offered me a job after his wife told him about a temporary repair I did for her when her car broke down. When my supervisor finished his education and left for his career, the manager offered me his job if I got my GED. I accomplished that in 6 months. That Saturday, I was driving a truck from the lube shop to move my few belongings into my new place because I had just been promoted and transferred to help open a new store in a different city. I pulled up next to a woman whose car was steaming. As I approached her, I gave her a moment to decide if I was safe or not. Seeing that I looked trustworthy, she rolled down her window a little so we could talk. After she popped the hood, I inspected the car and found the problem after about 20 minutes. I was a bit dirty, but I explained that I would temporarily fix a metal water line that had broken, causing her car to overheat. I made sure to explain what I was doing. Using duct tape, plastic tubing, screws, and clamps from the tools in the truck, I fixed the hose that was split. I spent about 2 hours on it. I collected water from a nearby creek in a soda bottle to refill her radiator. Just as I finished, she came out to see what I'd done. I told her it was a temporary fix, but it would get her to her destination if she was careful not to push the car. I advised her not to go too fast or use the freeway. The nice lady and her daughter asked about me and where I worked. I told them my job. When they offered me money for my help, I politely declined and suggested they do something nice for someone else instead. They later drove to the Costco store where her husband worked in Bellingham. I guess when he learned about the repair I did, his staff called it creative. They said it was something they wouldn't have thought of, even with their experience. For the temporary fix, I connected a plastic tube to stop the leak after cutting the broken line. After I secured the piece with metal screws, I laid duct tape over the area that had split and tightened it with 2 small clamps. This was to make sure the piece wouldn't move under pressure. The mechanic mentioned that I needed quick and precise hands to do the repair. He wondered if I had been hurt while working. The lady's husband had come to find me at the quick lube shop where I worked, showing support that helped me get my GED. One day, the store manager's secretary called for me to come to his office. It sounded serious, so I went right away. When I entered, I saw 2 police officers in plain clothes waiting for me. It turned out my mother had reported me missing after I had left. A program had linked back to me through the online classes I was taking, leading them to find me. Over the past weeks, the detectives had been checking on me and told the local police that I had been found. They informed me that my mother had been told I was safe and where I was living. They also explained that since I was now considered an adult, there wasn't much more they could do. After a brief talk about my life over the past 5 years and why I had left, they let me know that my mother wanted me to call home due to a serious issue concerning my father. It made me think of everything I had tried to leave behind. I spent about an hour in the store manager's office explaining everything. After hearing my story, he understood why I seemed to prefer being alone and why I kept my thoughts to myself. He asked me when I would want to go back and deal with my past. I replied that I would give him an answer after I figured out what that would involve. Later that evening, after discussing it with my friends, I decided to call home. I spent a few minutes online searching until I found my grandfather's phone number. He then gave me my sister Ren's number, and when she answered, she told me that our father had died in an accident while he was serving his time. She also mentioned that I was named in his will. However, nothing could proceed without my meeting with his lawyer first. I found it odd that no information could be shared without both my approval and that of the other executors. It reminded me of something my father had said about wanting to have the final say. Initially, I didn't want to go back, but a friend pointed out something significant about me. She said, "You've been hurt by the women closest to you, and you found it hard to let others in." I disagreed, but she noted that she had only seen me in social situations without ever dating anyone. She asked if it was because I didn't want to face more pain. She suggested that to answer that, I would need to confront my past, as it would continue to influence my life. I stayed quiet because I hadn't considered it before. During my drive back home, I started to understand the truth in her words. I realized that my relationships with women were influenced by my past experiences with my mother and sisters. I had unknowingly built walls that kept others at a distance. To sort things out, I knew I needed to return home. I found out my father had died 7 months earlier and that I had a half-brother I had never met, who was almost 5 years old. I asked Ren to send me the lawyer's contact information. 2 weeks later, I began my long drive back to my childhood home. I had changed a lot in the 5 years I had been away. I resembled my father but had my mother's build. I was 6 feet 2 inches tall, broad-shouldered, and looked fit. I had dark brown hair with a light spot at my temple and facial hair that made me look older than I was. According to my research, I could make the trip in 1 long day, but I chose to take 3 days. During the drive, I realized that long-distance driving required preparation, giving me time to think about how to face family I had distanced myself from and allowing me to process my grief once more. Life had turned me into someone who was cautious about trusting people. I didn't take anyone at face value and learned more about them and myself in the process. Those close to me labeled me a solitary man because they found it hard to understand me. Looking back at that time, I could see how much I had grown. I still saw the hidden truths, the false words, and the actions of my mother and 2 older sisters as the reason for my father's troubles. Looking at it now as an adult, I understood that my dad was like a player in a game where the odds were against him. What they did felt cold and planned. By the time I crossed into Missouri, I had decided that I would find a way to make them accountable for taking my father's freedom. Listening to a local talk radio station, I realized there were many others like me who wished for a fair way to address wrongdoings. I drove into Jackson, taking the first exit off the highway as the evening rush began. Locals considered this route the back way in. Most people were leaving Cape to head home. I was surprised to see that not much had changed since I grew up there. I booked a room at a motel on the main street near the police station, at a spot where 2 state roads met. The old steam train near the Historical Society still looked the same. It reminded me that time seemed to stand still there. Its unchanged look suggested they still hadn't raised enough money to restore it. The motel, once part of a chain, was now privately owned and had been renamed Town Inn. They offered free breakfast for guests. After I settled in, I took a quick shower and changed my clothes, getting ready to go out for dinner. Knowing how the Jackson Police Department operated, I figured that by the end of my first night, they would have checked my license plate. They would know I was back in town. I guessed that within 2 days an officer would come to see me. Carnivals often used this motel when they were in town for the fair. Because of this, the police regularly checked the plates of their workers. Driving to Cape, I noticed many changes, especially the new 5-lane intersection at the highway exit. I stopped at Ruby Tuesdays for a cheeseburger platter and their salad bar. While I was at the salad bar for the second time, I spotted a woman I recognized. She had been a friend of my sister's in high school. I quickly thought my family would know I was back in town. Tammy Preston was someone I had admired since my teenage years. Seeing her again brought back memories of hot summer days by the pool. Even now, she still looked amazing. I remembered how I spent hours watching her and her friends trying to get the perfect tan. Tammy was a natural blonde, kind-hearted and gentle. My grandmother often mentioned her lovely spirit and hoped that she would find a good partner in life. Tammy often stood up for me against my sisters. She had a genuine quality that made her stand out. Her gentle nature was something I always admired, and I wondered how she remained friends with my sisters, who were very different from her. During my meal, I caught her looking at me. I sensed her curiosity and noticed her texting someone on her phone. I waited, expecting that she would come over to talk before I finished eating. I was right, and as she approached, I stood to greet her. Your sister Ren, who is on vacation, confirmed it was you, Brandon, from the picture I sent her. It took her a bit to respond because you've changed so much. I thought it was you, but your height and facial hair made me uncertain. I must say, though, I find your new look quite nice, Tammy said as she reached my table. May I join you for a moment? Please do, Tammy, I replied. You still look just as lovely as the last time I saw you. That made her smile, and by the time she sat down, it felt like no time had passed since we last met. Her expressions told me that her personality was still very much the same. Ren would like to introduce you to her husband if you stay in town long enough, Tammy said. She and her husband are away for a few days. What brought you back, and where are you living now? I'm in Washington State. I assume you know my family found me, and I'm back for a few days, I replied. I got called back to start dealing with my father's estate. I didn't know, but I understand why you left, Tammy said. Your letter to your mom shared many truths that they wanted to keep hidden. They were not happy when some of it was printed in the local paper after a big headline weeks before. It created quite a stir that still affects them today. Honestly, what your letter revealed changed things between Ren and me. We went from being best friends to just knowing each other casually. This caught my interest. It was surprising to hear that from Tammy, especially since she and Ren had seemed so close before. My parents and I talked about everything back then, and we agreed that you had no choice given what you found out. They were impressed by how mature your letter was. We all thought that if some truths had come out during your father's trial, he might not have been convicted. It was the right thing for you to do, given the circumstances. So, what are you up to now? She asked, curious. I run the automotive department for a Costco store, and I'm also working on my degree in business administration, I explained. Are you married? Tammy asked. No, marriage isn't for me, and I don't think it ever will be. I have my mother, sisters, and what they did to my dad to thank for that, I said, my tone a bit colder. With what happened, I find it hard to trust someone who claims to love you. Seeing how they treated my father has changed my view on relationships, and I think I might end up single for life. From what I've heard since you left, Tammy said, I understand why you feel that way. My parents think it will take years for you to move past this. It must have turned your world upside down. Maybe one day you will meet someone who helps you see things differently. It will take time to realize that not everyone is like your mother and sisters. Tammy shared that my mother had remarried and taken her new husband's name. There were rumors about her behaving similarly to how she had with my father. Now she was known as Sarah Irene Perkins. Ren and Sparrow seemed to have a good relationship with our mother's new husband, Samuel Arthur Perkins, who was still a dentist in town. I noticed that Tammy's friends were watching us closely, which I found curious. We chatted for a few more minutes until she mentioned she had to get back to her group. I sensed she didn't want to leave, which puzzled me. Before she departed, she commented that I had grown into a good-looking man. When I checked my phone, I saw we had talked for over an hour. I settled the bill, drove back to Jackson City Park, and went for a long walk to think about what I'd learned. I couldn't help but watch her as she walked back to her friends. No matter what she wore, I thought she looked wonderful. It still confused me why I felt so complete when she was near. Tammy reminded me that our actions can create questions that linger throughout our lives. My mother's behaviors had led to gossip about her new situation, true or not. To escape those rumors, she might need to leave the place she had lived her whole life. It had been over 5 years since I last saw Tammy, and as I lay in the motel bed that night, my thoughts were only of her. I wondered if I had acted maturely during our brief meeting. The next afternoon, I visited the lawyer's office. I learned that my father's farm equipment dealership had been sold, along with the house my parents lived in. Other assets had been valued, and some sold to give my mother what the court decided was her share. I was surprised because I had no idea how much my parents had been worth before the divorce. My father had used his share of the money after the court split to invest in tech stocks, which had grown significantly. He began rebuilding his real estate holdings with those funds. Your father was smart. After you told him what you found out, he started preparing himself, the lawyer explained. He managed to keep some of his assets from your mother and the court. For instance, he set up a new investment company under a limited trust with his name and yours. It was legally established in a place with lower taxes. It kept everything safe from U.S. taxes. The bank account has around $300,000 in cash, and the company's stocks were worth just under $2 million 2 weeks ago, the lawyer added. After the first year, he was moved to a lower security facility where he could have his own computer. As a result, the investment company grew quickly because of his business skills. It's all run through a company that pays no taxes, so it has expanded a lot, he said. It even owns the farm where your grandfather lives, so you'll need to work things out with him. There's a list of all the buildings owned by the company, including some other interesting properties. With the price of building materials going up recently, I think the value of their assets is much higher than what's shown. Just so you know, your father decided that your sister wouldn't get anything after he reviewed everything. He felt that since they supported their mother, they didn't deserve any reward. So everything he owned now belongs to you. Your grandfather is in charge of your father's will, so I suggest you talk to him. He was very proud that you could see the situation clearly, the lawyer said before sharing more details I needed to know. When I looked over everything in the privacy of my motel room, I was amazed by what my father had achieved while he was away. He had turned the remnants of a long marriage into a successful enterprise. The way he set things up allowed me to take some money, pay off the debts on the buildings, and live comfortably without investing more if I didn't want to. I was reminded of how quickly he had regained what he lost from the divorce, taking me back to when he first taught me about money. He taught me to see money as a tool to create opportunities. My dad always said that while we need money for daily life, the key is to use it wisely. He suggested sacrificing some immediate desires at the start, then saving wisely to give myself a good start in life. To do this, I needed to recognize that advertisements often aimed to encourage spending, which could be unwise with hard-earned money. It might have been tough to give up small pleasures at first, but once established, I could use other people's money to benefit myself. From the time he spent away, he had avoided spending on basic needs. I could see how that helped him grow faster without extra costs. He followed his own advice by using bank money to finance properties that generated income, and they were paying for themselves. I thought back to when I arrived in Washington State, hoping to get to Canada. Knowing I needed to live cheaply, I scanned the daily papers for a small room to rent. Within 3 days, I found one. Just 2 days later, I got my first full-time job as a mechanic. It was great because it was close to where I lived. I stayed in that small room for 3 years before getting an apartment because it was very affordable and somewhat unofficial. No one bothered anyone, so I could go about my life without attracting attention. I cooked on a small stove I picked up from a thrift store and did my laundry at a local laundromat. My place had just a small bathroom with a shower. I kept my expenses low, owning only a basic phone from a store. I made my own lunches and used a thermos for drinks to avoid spending at vending machines. In 2 years, I saved about 60% of my weekly income after taxes. I used that to put a down payment on a 6-unit building that I now owned. My father's advice had proven true. I think perhaps my wish to stay under the radar guided my choices in living simply. It was when the owner of the lube shop promoted me and moved me to Bellingham that I bought the 6-unit building I was now living in. I discovered an unopened, handwritten letter from my father among the papers the lawyer gave me. I learned that while in prison, he found out he had a serious illness. He believed it was from the chemicals he was exposed to during his service. By the time he got tested, it was too late, and he realized it was a grave situation. He had a plan to ensure his life insurance would help me after he was gone. I made a note to find out if it went through. In the letter, he asked me to let go of any bitterness I had. He wrote that everyone has their struggles and to learn from his mistakes. He urged me to avoid letting my anger lead me to trouble like it had for him. He encouraged me to use the resources he left me to do what I needed, legally. I pondered my father's final words when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, I saw the chief of police. He was there to talk about closing the case that was still open regarding me. I remembered him. He had been present at the court each day, ready to answer questions. "Brandon, I know you believe your father's situation was unfair," the chief said, "and you feel it was caused by what your mother and sisters did. What you might not know is that the weekend he passed away, he had just won his appeal and was about to be released. The appeals court decided by a vote of 4-2 that he shouldn't have been found guilty since he didn't start the fight. He was just defending himself against a man who had a knife. Neither the district attorney nor his lawyer emphasized that point during the original trial. If they had, it might have changed the result." "It's too late now, I'm afraid," I replied. "And from what I've heard since returning, there are rumors she is causing trouble again." "We've heard those too," he said. "Sadly, there isn't much we can do legally. She's not the first person to manipulate situations for gain, and she won't be the last. Often, they end up worse off than they imagined. She comes from a family known for bending the rules, always testing how far they can go. We've tried to gather evidence against them for years, but without success." When I didn't answer, the chief continued, We checked your background and you've done well for yourself. Don't let your family's past drag you down. Settle your father's estate, return to your life, and leave the past behind. One question before you go. What do you think of Judge Fiona Araceli? I asked. She's a modern second-generation Mexican-American and is involved in the women's movement. For years, she raised her kids on her own after her husband left. He returned to Mexico, feeling out of place here. It took her some time to finalize the divorce due to abandonment. In her 20 years on the bench, your father's case was the first that was appealed successfully. Is she still nearby? I asked. No, she was appointed to the state appeals court and now lives in the capital, the chief explained. She had to step back from your father's appeal. I thanked him for his insights before he left and began to plan my next steps. My father's last message to me lingered in my thoughts. The legal situation could be tricky if handled a certain way. One thing I needed to do was investigate the judge's personal life. If she had truly divorced him due to abandonment, how did she know he returned to Mexico? Did she have any contact with him? Did their kids know him? I had learned that there are always two sides to every story, and you need both to find the truth. Judge Fiona Araceli had a spotless reputation, which either meant she was genuine or hiding something important. Having worked hard to stay out of trouble, I had kept a clean reputation myself. I wondered if she was doing the same for a similar reason. I needed to find out what her secrets would reveal. When DNA technology first emerged in legal cases, the FBI asked that samples from unidentified bodies be collected before handling the remains. This process helped them identify many missing persons over the years. On an early Thursday morning, as I drove down the long country driveway to my grandfather's home, memories flooded back of countless visits to their large, three-story house. I had spent so much time there growing up that it always felt like a second home. I saw my grandfather, a proud man, slowly driving his tractor toward the house. It was nice to see he still wore his old straw hat to shield himself from the sun. The unfamiliar out-of-state license plates on my car must have caught his attention. After turning off the tractor, he got out, his curiosity leading him to come over. After parking, I got out just as my grandmother stepped out from the back kitchen door to see who had arrived. Even though it had been 5 years since I'd last seen her, she looked remarkably the same. I could see the surprise on her face as I approached. The last time we had been about the same height. Now I towered over her. She stood still in disbelief. "Brandon, you have a lot to explain," my grandmother exclaimed, rushing toward me. "It's so good to see you're alive." She hugged me tightly, tears of joy in her eyes, just as my grandfather reached us. He said in a calm voice, "You didn't have to run. We might have figured out a way for you to stay with us, but you had to act stubborn, just like your father." For the next few hours, I answered their many questions about my life since I had gone away. They wanted to know everything, every detail and choice I made. After hearing what I had been doing and what I had achieved, I could see both my grandparents were impressed. They listened carefully as I shared my story. From them, I learned that my father had died in an accident in the prison laundry due to old dryers breaking down. They had no knowledge of his illness. The investigation concluded that equipment failure was to blame. I wondered if he had set things up in a way that he could leave without anyone questioning it. They really took action when they found out which motel I was staying at. My grandfather, my dad's father, and my favorite drove me back to town to check out. They believed I deserved better than that place and offered me a place to stay until my departure. On our way back, my grandfather and I had a private conversation about what happened to my father. Grandpa said, "Brandon, your mother let me copy your goodbye letter to her. My wife and I showed it to your dad. He was really upset and said he couldn't believe his own son. He also told me to let you know he was proud of how you were handling everything. Then he said not to worry about you because you were strong enough to get through this." When I didn't reply, my grandfather looked at me, trying to figure out what I was thinking. Then he asked, "I can see the determination in your face, just like your father had. What do you plan to do?" "Once I have all the information I need," I said, "I'm going to file a civil lawsuit for wrongful death against everyone involved." "It could take years," my grandfather warned, "and you might find it wasn't worth it in the end." "I hope that's not the case," I replied. "Why's that?" he asked. "Your thinking seems off." The longer it takes, the more it costs, and it could strain my relationships with my mother and sisters. If they know everything could be lost because of past actions, even small problems could feel huge, I explained. You don't need to act out in anger to find justice. I caught a smile on my grandfather's face just before he said, "That's clever. Using the legal system like that will take them by surprise. Their families will have to live with the worry that all their hard work might be wasted. It could lead to trouble for them in their relationships. Who do you plan to name in the lawsuit?" "The judge, the state, the police department, the district attorney, my mom, her new husband, and my 2 sisters. It will come from my father's estate," I explained. "If I can get my dad's lawyer to take the case, he can say the suit was filed because the estate can't be settled until a decision is made." "That will be hard to prove," he said. "It's about the circumstances," I explained. "If one thing hadn't happened, the next wouldn't have either. That's why they need to be named together and separately. You will need records from the trial and the hearings," he said. "But even that may not be enough. When we get back to the farm," I added, "you can see the logs I kept back then. I brought them with me because they have detailed information about everything I witnessed. Their own words will become a problem for them." "Your dad kept notes about his thoughts and plans during his business dealings," my grandfather said. "It helped him remember important details and even saved him money." "Do you know where those notes are?" I asked. "There might be pieces of his life that could connect to my case." "We stored most of his personal things in the basement before he went away," he said. "It all belongs to you. I'll show you where it is when we get home." "I'm also going to need to hire some investigators to look into the judge's background," I added, "because my dad's lawyer thought something in her personal life made her biased against men. If we can prove that, it might be the key to everything." "Why do you think that?" my grandfather asked. "Something about her divorce doesn't seem right," I explained. "When you put everything together, it doesn't fit. I took steps to stay under the radar and build a good reputation. It seems like she did the same, which makes me think she's hiding something. How did she get a divorce on abandonment grounds if she knew her husband had moved back to Mexico? Abandonment only counts if there's been no contact for a while." Within an hour, we were back at the farm. After my grandmother showed me the bedroom I would use, I quickly unpacked and got my logs for him to read. It took him about 4 hours. During that time, Grandma and I prepared for the first home-cooked meal I would have in years. It was a moment of connection that brought back fond memories for both of us. While we cooked, my grandmother filled me in on the latest news about her children and their families. She then decided to have a family barbecue on Sunday to celebrate my return home. We were still chatting when my grandfather returned to the kitchen. "Brandon," he said, "the dates and details show a very troubling picture. I never thought 3 women could be so manipulative, but your notes prove it. Clara's actions, based on what I've read, confirm my suspicions about your mother's behavior during that time. Your logs show she was trying to find ways to drive your dad out of their marriage by making things worse. Our son's thoughts were pulled in many directions, making it hard for him to see the full picture. Their own words and actions showed that what they did was planned." After dinner, my grandfather took me downstairs to where he had stored my father's belongings. It took us quite a while to look through the boxes. Among the items was the computer my father had used in prison. There were many things I wanted to keep, some that my grandfather wanted, and the notebooks written during the time we were searching for answers until my father passed away. I spent most of the night reading what my father had written. With what I already knew, I could connect his thoughts to what was happening back then. Looking at it from both sides, I realized that when I mixed what I had recorded with his notes, a very clear timeline emerged. Individual events that seemed random when separated revealed a strong intent when shown together. At that point, I discovered his computer password and the access details for his Bitcoin account, which had never been mentioned during the divorce. Using my phone, I logged into the account and found both our names as owners. I thought to myself, "Well done, Dad," realizing he had been aware of how things would turn out with my mother. She ended up with less than 2% of his assets. He had started investing when Bitcoin first appeared, putting in a steady $100 a month. Over the years, he had invested about $16,000, and now it was worth millions. I was surprised he had done this because my father's biggest worry was that a solar impulse could destroy the electrical grid, taking everything with it. The very next day, I began to convert what we had into cash. On Friday, I set up my father's computer on the basement floor and used the password I had found to log in. That was when things got interesting. It seemed my father had acted on my suspicions and hired a private investigation firm. He received their report after he paid them, which was when he got to use a computer. I learned many things I hadn't known before. It helped explain my mother's actions and seemed to reveal what I now thought was her plan from the start. To handle the civil lawsuit, I realized I needed to move back to the area. I had to keep track of things closely to share important information at just the right time. This way, the pressure I placed on a few individuals would keep increasing when they least expected it. I called for my grandfather to come down and see what I had found. When he came down and saw the computer, he laughed and said, "At my age, if I get down there, I might not be able to get back up. Let's ask your grandmother where we can put it." We found her in the kitchen, making a special lunch treat for me. She was rolling out the dough for her homemade cheddar biscuits, covered in red gravy. Growing up, it was one of my favorite meals whenever I stayed with them. I guess she had overheard us because when we entered the room, she asked, "Is it for a permanent spot or just temporary?" "Permanent," I said. "If you both don't mind, I'd like to move down here to the farm." The look on their faces said it all. I knew they had thought this might happen. "The whole third floor can be remodeled into whatever you want," my grandfather said. "I can talk to your uncles this weekend to see how quickly we can get it done. Then I'll move some things around in my sewing room," my grandmother said. "That will leave room for a small desk until we finish the rest." "Have you thought about what you will do for work?" my grandfather asked. "Thanks to Dad, I now own a large piece of land at the second exit into Jackson off the interstate," I replied. "I think he saw the future growth in that area. On the West Coast, many gas stations with convenience stores now have mini fast food chains. I think White Castle might be interested in doing that. I'm going to look into it, and next year I want to learn from Granddad how to run a farm operation every day." My grandfather had tears in his eyes and struggled with his words when he said, "Your dad always said you were meant for the land. That's why he bought the place from us. He would be so proud that you're coming home to become a farmer." "For now, it's best to keep things quiet," I said. "The longer most people don't know our plans, the better it is for those who need to be kept in the dark about the lawsuit that's coming. Dad had a double indemnity accidental death insurance policy. As far as I know, it hasn't been claimed. I'm going to write a detailed outline of the suit I plan to file to see if the recovery team wants to assist." Granddad stood in silence, likely trying to understand my thinking. After a moment, he spoke. "It's a smart move. The estate and the insurance company could make it look like just big business fighting against the government. Your sisters and mother saw themselves as victims of their situation because of their relationship. They won't rush to fix things," Grandma said. "They'll slowly share details to show the government they're building a case. This way you can continue your life as if nothing is wrong." "After dinner, I'll outline how I want to remodel the third floor," I said. "We just need a good reason that everyone will accept." "That's simple," my grandfather replied. "I'll say we've convinced you to move home once you're settled on the West Coast. If they ask why, I'll explain that as executor of your dad's estate, I want you here until everything is settled." "Isn't that going to be hard for you with my sisters and Mom?" I asked. "Braden, we haven't spoken to any of them since we read your letter," Grandma said. "Your dad and I decided that by their actions, they were not acting like family anymore. We don't understand why they did it, and I guess we never will." Both grandparents noticed the big smile on my face as I listened to Grandma. "When I left 5 years ago," I said, "it was because I couldn't accept what they did. I thought I had cut ties with them, not knowing you had done the same. If anyone asks, I'll say Dad arranged for the lawsuit to continue, just to ensure it would go on if anything happened to him." "If we get any questions from them or about them," Grandma said, "we need to agree on how to respond." "That's easy," I said. "We'll say it's best to stay out of it until the estate is settled. If anyone else asks, we'll just say, no comment." "Why do you think that?" my grandfather asked. "Grandpa, if you were checking a reference for a job and they said no comment, what would that tell you?" I asked. That there might be something wrong or an issue that made them shy away from giving their opinion, he replied with a smile. That would make me think twice about you. It's a smart plan because your mother and sisters won't figure out what we really mean. Driving home gave me a chance to think about everything that had happened. I realized that my dad was in a tough spot. If I could do to them what they did to my father, they would be caught off guard until the end. I believe that in our state, bankruptcy wouldn't free them from the court's decision, I said. It's a good thing we've kept the details of your father's will private, my grandfather said. Your sisters will think anything they owe will be taken care of by their share of the estate. On Sunday, my grandfather's whole family came for a barbecue when they found out I was home. The last to arrive was my older cousin with someone I knew well. Tammy Press showed up in denim shorts and a loose tank top because the spring-fed pond would be great for cooling off. She had her hair in a ponytail, and more than a few people noticed when I looked her way. She looked like a picture from a classic painting. I remembered the summers by our pool when she wore a white swimsuit that was a bit revealing. Those memories sometimes frustrated me because I wished to be closer to her. With her long legs and friendly smile, she was someone I found hard to forget. To many, she might be just an attractive girl, but to me, she always stood out. I thought how nice it would be to have her beside me. The day passed with me sharing what it's like where I live now and how great it feels to be back home. Using my phone, I managed to sneak a few pictures of Tammy without anyone noticing. My grandfather and I did most of the cooking with fresh ingredients from Grandma's garden that morning. Tammy and Grandma enjoyed watching my knife skills as I prepared vegetables for the tacos and burritos. Later, I would learn they had a long discussion about how well I had done for myself in the last 5 years. Tammy told Grandma that she thought I had grown into a nice-looking man. Grandma shared that she felt the same way about her husband when they were young and still did. My grandfather made burgers with pulled pork and ground beef, while I prepared soft tacos and burritos, catering to everyone's preferences. I was so focused on cooking for the more than 20 guests that I hardly noticed the attention Tammy was giving me. After everyone finished eating, Grandpa stood up and whistled to get everyone's attention. "We need to fix up the 3rd floor of the house right away," he said. "I'm looking for people willing to help out." "Why?" David, my oldest uncle, asked. "As the executor of Clarence's estate," Grandpa explained, "I've asked Brandon, the main beneficiary, to come home until everything is sorted. Clarence's will stated that a project he started needs to be finished first. It took us a few hours to agree on everything." That was when I noticed how focused Tammy was on what Grandpa was saying. "Brandon has decided to move back home because I will teach him how to run the farm. Starting in the new year, it will be a full-time job again. As the future owner of the property, Brandon believes we need to update and modernize the farmhouse to meet the latest standards. The 3rd floor will be where my wife and I stay while we work on the 2nd floor. Both renovations need to happen quickly since Brandon wants to come back as soon as he can settle his life on the West Coast." Grandpa's remaining sons and his 2 sons-in-law all agreed to help. Uncle George added, "Brandon learned a lot working with us as a kid. With how beef prices are these days, he can make a good living here." I noticed Tammy smiling and wondered why. Her grandfather was successful and her family had a large greenhouse business. Her dad was a respected surgeon and her mom was a trained physiotherapist. Her date soon joined the talk about the family project. I took the opportunity to help Grandma by picking up some paper plates and cups from the porch for the burn pile. Tammy came over to help and quietly asked for my phone number. I wondered about her relationship with my cousin before giving it to her. Not getting a clear answer, I grabbed 4 bags of paper trash and headed toward the burn pile behind the barn. Tammy silently picked up 2 and followed me. Once we were behind the barn, she spoke up. "Now that we have some privacy, I can explain. Gary's not sure about coming out because he's worried about how the family will react. Since I'm not in a serious relationship right now, I sometimes help him keep up appearances. We've been friends since grade school and would do anything for each other," Tammy said. "For years, I had a crush on you," I said, handing her my cell phone. "Set your contact info and text yourself." "Your sisters teased me about that for years, even though you're only 3 years younger," Tammy said with a smile while she did as I asked. "Back in middle school, I would have faced a lot of teasing if I showed any interest in you." It will be interesting to see if I can change your mind about women. I love a good challenge. So, what's the real reason you are moving back? I want to pursue a case against those who disrupted my father's life, I said. I came up with this idea while driving back. My grandpa and I plan to use the estate to make it look like we're not directly involved. You seem more mature than your age. The way you handle things shows that, Tammy said. Your grandmother is impressed with how you've done for yourself and says you're someone who knows how to be comfortable in your own skin. I thought I recognized you, but the changes in your height and facial hair made me unsure. When you grew up, you really grew up. I told the girls I was sitting with that I had met my next boyfriend. I'm excited to prove them right. Tammy noticed me smiling. Then she tilted her head towards me. Without thinking, we shared a gentle kiss. A few more followed before we realized we had been away for a while. We both felt the urge to hold hands, even though she was with my cousin. Back then, she had always been taller than me. Now, we were almost the same height, just a couple of inches apart. On our way back to the family, I explained how we planned to handle the case and my relationship with my mother and sisters. She thought our approach would save us from a lot of conflicts. Gary noticed us walking back slowly and could tell something had shifted between us. As I got a cold drink, he approached and said, "Brandon, let me grab a cold drink. Then we can check out the third floor since Grandpa asked me to supervise the project. I want to get a better idea of what you're thinking." Once we reached the third floor where I was staying, Gary got serious. "Just so you know, Tammy and I are just good friends. If you want to start something with her when you return, that won't be an issue. But it might be for some of the family." "Why?" I asked. "Many believe that once we figure things out and settle down, we will end up together." "Most people would say that Gary and I have had a mixed relationship for years," Gary said. "For personal reasons, we will always just be friends." I handed him my cell phone. "Please add your contact details. Tammy and I have started to connect already. It looks like we've liked each other for a long time. Now that we are grown-ups, the age difference doesn't matter." "She mentioned it to you? I'm glad to hear that," Gary replied. "I care about her, so please don't take advantage of her until you know what you want. If you hurt her, you'll have to deal with me." "Don't worry, Gary. I'm not like my mom," I said. Gary seemed relieved. "Good. I believe you." As soon as we left the house, we saw Tammy waiting for us. From her expression, we could tell she was worried about our private conversation. It was funny because we both said, "Don't worry, everything's fine." The three of us ended up sitting on the back porch with Tammy between us, having a nice chat about life. Anyone watching would think we were in a deep conversation. What they didn't know was that we were planning how to act around family until Tammy and I became more serious. We wanted to be seen as a close group, and we thought we had succeeded. After the family left, Grandma and I shared a pot of tea while Granddad had already gone to bed. "Brandon, I don't know if you know the whole story about Gary and Tammy, but if they were a couple, then your grandfather isn't my husband," Grandma said. "Gary has been open about being gay for a long time, and Tammy couldn't stop looking at you all day." "Tammy told me that Gary is scared to tell the family," I explained. "Out of friendship, she helps him keep that secret. He knows it might change if she finds someone serious. I believe they have been friends since school." "But how did you know?" "My brother, who lives in California, is gay. Growing up with him taught me a lot about how some people keep their feelings hidden," she said. "Even when he visits now, he still keeps it to himself. That's why I always told him I love him no matter what back when he was a kid. Until he accepts himself, he won't find peace." "You should know that Gary supports Tammy and me exploring a relationship when I move back," I continued. "I've seen her with my sister, and I guess she knew I liked her. What I didn't realize was that she felt the same way about me. Just be careful. Tammy and Ren were really close," Grandma warned, "before everyone found out about the family issues." "I know," I replied. "On my first night back, I ran into her at a restaurant. She told me that she and Ren were no longer friends and that there was a big divide. It seems whatever Ren said didn't work." "Do you believe her?" Grandma asked. "She told me Gary is gay and made sure to say it privately," I answered after thinking. "She also mentioned that she told her friends I would be her next boyfriend." Grandma smiled and said, "Another good thing is that she's not with you for your money. Her family is already doing well." I don't think Grandma realized how meaningful her words were. Given my family's past, we all knew that money issues had caused troubles for my mom and sisters. Grandma's insight made me feel I could trust Tammy. On Monday morning after breakfast, I set up the computer in the sewing room. I started organizing details from my dad's logbooks and mine, figuring out events day by day. I wanted to work quickly because I had to leave on Thursday or Friday. Sometimes, I had to pause and think about things we noticed together. It amazed me how complicated they had tried to make everything. Seeing it all laid out helped show how events connected, making it difficult for legal experts to argue against it. The investigator's report also supported our findings. During a coffee break, I called my dad's lawyer to make an appointment for Wednesday at 2. Then I called the investigators my dad hired and set up a meeting for Friday at 10. At 4 o'clock, Tammy called. After chatting a bit, we decided to go to dinner at Bethia's, a local restaurant known for its Irish food. Since she worked until 5 as an insurance broker, she asked me to pick her up at her parents' house at 7. Before I left, Grandma gave me a set of keys to the farmhouse. "Brandon, enjoy your dinner and be open to learning new things about each other," she advised. "Remember, it's been 5 years since you last saw each other regularly. A lot may have changed during that time. Your maturity is beyond what many young men your age would show. Be honest with yourself and let these new traits shine through. Take the chance to explore and accept these changes." Tammy still lived with her parents, so I expected them to be strict. But when I knocked on the door, they weren't home. Instead, Tammy's younger brother, who was around my age, answered. "Hi, you must be Brandon," he said. "Tammy will be right down. I'm Hunter, by the way. You don't look like a big deal." "I'm not much older than you," I replied. "I've just been living on my own for a few years, which made me grow up a bit faster." "You must be special because my sister has been talking about you non-stop since you returned home," Hunter said. "Last night, when she learned you were moving back, she kept us awake with her excitement." Before I could answer, Tammy came down the stairs. "Brandon, my brother likes to exaggerate, so don't take him too seriously." The look on Tammy's face made me think Hunter was telling the truth. As she walked past him, he quietly mouthed, "Told you." On the way to the restaurant, I learned more about Tammy's friend Ren's situation. Tammy described Ren's husband as an older man with a lot of money. They were married for about 3 months, and Ren was expecting their first child. "Was it a quick wedding because of the baby?" I asked. "We won't know for sure until after the baby is born," Tammy responded. I asked, "How long do you think their relationship will last? If she keeps her word, she might wait to have a couple of kids to make sure she has support," Tammy said confidently. "I even heard that your mom talked about something similar with her new husband. Your dad had to support you all until you turned 19. "I didn't know that," I said. "That makes his achievements even more impressive." "So your mom didn't leave him with nothing," Tammy noted, like she said she did. "It's a fair division state," I explained. "He started rebuilding his life by investing in technology and bought into new markets. He used what he earned to buy properties that bring in money. Once everything is settled, I can sell those and live comfortably if I want. One of my properties is at the second exit off the freeway, and I want to research starting a gas station there." "That's great! When I tell my parents, it will ease their worries about you being interested in me for my family's money," Tammy laughed. "Even better, tell them we agreed to a prenuptial agreement to protect what we have if we get serious," I suggested. "If they push for details, tell them I own the farm my grandfather lives on and many other income-producing properties. As a bonus, when my great-grandfather sold land for the interstate, they promised to build us an access ramp whenever we wanted." Tammy looked amazed. "That 250 acres is right next to the interstate. It will be a gold mine someday. What a great inheritance." "I see it as a safety net for the future," I said. "Right now, part of it is still forested, which gives us privacy. My grandfather and I used to go there every hunting season to get deer for winter meals. He taught me how to hunt." "If you're set up so well, what did he leave your 2 sisters?" Tammy asked. "Nothing," I replied. "Dad believed people should face the consequences of their choices. Since my sisters sided with our mom, who led to Dad being jailed, he thought they should accept the results of their actions." "He's right," Tammy agreed. "It's a shame more people in our society don't feel the same. Many think they can get away with bad behavior and be forgiven." When we arrived at the restaurant, Tammy decided to get out of my side of the car since she had been sitting close to me. We entered the restaurant holding hands. As we sat down, Tammy mentioned that one of her friends worked there and would likely see us together. I asked if it was important, and she said it was just to show I was right about our connection. When the waitress approached, she was smiling and handed us a menu. I recognized her as one of Tammy's friends. I ordered a stout, while Tammy requested a glass of red wine. I chose steak pie, and Tammy ordered shepherd's pie with a side of cheddar biscuits. As we enjoyed our drinks, my sister Sparrow walked in with some friends. Wren, Sparrow, and I were all born within 2 years of each other, with Wren being 2 years older than Tammy and Sparrow just 4 months older. Tammy spotted her right away, but I was too busy focused on a pair of enchanting eyes. When Sparrow walked over to our table, I noticed the mood shift. Tammy pointed out that she was approaching. "It's been a while since we saw each other," my sister said. "I wanted to say hello before dinner." They talked for a few minutes, catching up on their lives. I couldn't believe my older sister didn't recognize me at first. After a few looks, she asked Tammy who her friend was. Tammy then introduced me, saying, "Sparrow, this is the man who will be my steady boyfriend once he moves back to take care of his grandfather's farm." I stood up, extended my hand, and said, "It's been a while. You still look great, sis." Sparrow looked surprised and struggled to find words. I realized my height might have shocked her since I had grown taller. She finally said, "I wouldn't have recognized you, Brandon. You've changed a lot since I last saw you. Maybe it's the beard that's different." Later, Tammy laughed at how surprised Sparrow was when she heard my voice. It seemed clear my family wasn't as close anymore, and I wondered if Wren had told them I was back in town. "If you and your friends want to join us, you're welcome," I offered, planning to keep our relationship private. It would be a good chance to catch up. Without a word, Sparrow went back to her table. She spoke to her server, and soon she and her friends came over with drinks. I moved to sit next to Tammy. After introductions, Sparrow's friends asked why she didn't know I was in town. Her answer caught me off guard. 7 years ago, Brandon and I got caught up in something that changed our lives, she said. Wren was more involved, and I followed her. It ended up driving my younger brother away. We didn't realize the impact of what was happening. I haven't seen him in over 5 years, and I didn't recognize him because he has changed so much. I would be interested to hear his thoughts about that time. Tammy took my hand to show her support as I replied, "Everyone is still dealing with their own issues, so I won't comment much on it. I learned a lot about being independent, and it changed me." "It's clear Sparrow and I aren't as comfortable with each other as we used to be, but maybe we can rebuild that in time," I added. "I now live on the West Coast near the Pacific Ocean, and I have a life I enjoy." During dinner, Sparrow asked about our father's estate. I explained that we couldn't settle it until our father's lawsuit was resolved. He had set it up that way in his will. I thought about asking my father's lawyer if my sisters could challenge the will. "What does that mean?" Sparrow asked. "Dad believed he was treated unfairly, so he planned to sue. At the time of his death, he was appealing. In his will, he stated that if anything happened to him, the lawsuit should continue. Since he died in an accident, it became a wrongful death suit." "That could take years," Sparrow said. "That's why I'm coming back to run my grandfather's farm," I explained. "Since my grandfather is the executor of Dad's will, he'll be busy with lawyers and court issues." "Who do you think they will sue?" Sparrow asked. "I'm not sure," I replied. "If it were up to me, I'd include everyone involved that led to the accident." Tammy smiled, knowing the estate issues were pretty much settled and I didn't want to share that. Sparrow and I had a good discussion about my plans for the land. I mentioned I wanted to focus on organic farming and explore options. One of her friends mentioned that grass-fed beef sells for a higher price. Many don't realize that cows are often fed grain during the last weeks before going to market, when they should be eating natural grasses, which is just a way to charge more. By the end of dinner, Sparrow told me, "Brandon, I want to rebuild our relationship if you're open to it. You've changed so much that I hardly know you. You had a carefree outlook before, but now you seem more serious. It's different and reminds me of Dad in some ways." "That's what happens when trust is broken," I said. "It changes how you see things." Looking back at our father's trial, I realize how close I came to being in a similar situation. I think of the last few years of my father's life like he was playing a tough game of poker. Because of that, I've become careful and closed off. Now, I need people to show me they're trustworthy before I let them in. Sparrow fell silent when I spoke, reminded of why I had left. Her friends noticed and tried to change the mood. The letter I had written when I left was very honest and direct. It brought back memories for Sparrow and made her realize how serious my feelings had been. It also told her that what we had had would never come back. When I told our server I was paying for their meal, it caught her by surprise. As we walked out, Tammy said, "She understood the message you sent. She knows her family isn't trusted by you anymore. That's why she went quiet. Do you think she knows your father's case was decided in your favor?" "Since he passed away right after, I doubt it. Unless it was in the newspaper, most people wouldn't know," I said. "But what I wanted to make clear has been shared without any fuss. Soon they'll hear about a formal notice, but they don't know it involves them." "Brandon, don't let me forget how you can think logically, even during casual chats," Tammy said. "Why?" I asked. "Because it helps you see past the nonsense that many of us go on about," she explained. "Few people can see the truth as quickly as you do. It shows you're a leader, not a follower. The right person who wins your heart will have a wonderful life." After dinner, Tammy and I went to a cinema by the big stores to watch a movie. Then we decided to sit at a Dairy Queen to share a big banana split. While we enjoyed our dessert, two of her friends from the first night I was back in town walked in. The first thing they saw was us playfully feeding each other some of our treat. Tammy smiled widely when one of them said, "Wow, she wasn't kidding. Looks like she moved in fast. They definitely have history." "Sue Ellen, you got that right," Tammy said cheerfully. "Brandon and I have liked each other for years. Now that he's back, we're both open to see what happens. Get your orders and come join us." "We probably shouldn't," Sue Ellen answered. "We wouldn't want to interrupt your first date." "It's fine. Brandon and I spent all day together yesterday," Tammy replied. "Brandon is Gary's cousin and we were with his family." Tammy's friend looked a bit unsure, so I added, "Gary wants to see where this goes for us, but has warned me about the challenges because of our family's views." That was enough for them. As they picked up their orders, they came over to us. I moved closer to Tammy to make space for them. "Sue Ellen, Candace, let me introduce you to Sparrow's brother, Brandon James Allen," Tammy said when they settled in. Sue Ellen's eyes lit up with humor. "Unbelievable! The two who liked each other for so long are finally getting together. No wonder you were so excited when you came back. Brandon, did she tell you that the only reason she was friends with Sparrow was to be near you?" "Really?" I chuckled. "I'm definitely going to tease her about that." I turned to Candace. "Could you take a couple of pictures of us with my phone?" She happily agreed, and we took our first couple pictures together. They asked how soon I thought I could move back. I said it wouldn't take long if I got a management team for my cinema. If I decided to sell it, it might take a few months. For some reason, Tammy's friends seemed surprised I was already doing well. I then shared what I had accomplished in my life since moving away. Later, as we were heading back to Tammy's parents' house, she said, "You must have been really determined to achieve all of this." "Tammy, I chose Washington State for its welcoming views. I figured the police wouldn't chase me. I lucked out finding a cheap place and a job right away. Everything I needed was close by. I worked hard to stay out of sight," I explained. "My landlord liked me because I wasn't a bother. She let me use a little hot plate for cooking. When I turned 18, I got my GED and got into university. My plan was to move to Canada, but a good deed changed my path. The money I was saving for Canada became my down payment for my cinema and a car. I'm still amazed it took so much discipline to get where you are," Tammy said. "I thank my father for that," I said. "He taught me to control my desires at the beginning. Once you're settled, it's easier to use other people's money. The cinema cost about $300,000. I live in one 2-bedroom unit and rent out the other 5. After paying the mortgage and bills, I still have money left over. In the 3 years I've owned it, I've already regained my initial investment. With rising material costs, its value has increased. If I sell, the profit won't be taxed. If I decide to keep it, I will need to get it revalued to find out how much it's worth now. Any increase in value from that point will be taxed." He not only showed you why saving money is important, but also how to use it to earn more, Tammy said. He gave you skills that some people may never learn. How do your grandparents feel about what you're doing? They really questioned me about my choices in life. They were upset that I ran away even though they understand my reasons, I explained. Still, they seem proud of how things have turned out. You should be proud too, especially since you just turned 21 and are ahead of many friends from before, Tammy said. Your experiences have prepared you for anything that may come your way. I've learned that worrying isn't worth it because there's always a way to handle challenges if you get ready for the unexpected and are ready to deal with the outcomes, I replied. By then, we arrived at her parents' house, which was mostly dark except for the light by the front door. I walked her to the door to make sure she got in safely before giving her a few gentle goodnight kisses. What we didn't know was that her mother was waiting for her in the kitchen because she had many questions about the date. My granddad took me to my father's lawyer. After listening to us, the lawyer contacted the Prudential Life Insurance Company about my father's policy, which had been canceled due to non-payment after his passing. He quickly sent them a copy of the death certificate to show they were responsible for the $4 million payout. Once that was settled, we showed him a timeline I was creating that outlined the events connected to my father's death. I explained in detail what actions I wanted to take, emphasizing that I wanted to hold those responsible accountable for my father's accidental death. Mr. Carson Visage examined the information before sharing his thoughts. "Brandon," he said, "to be honest, this case is beyond my abilities. Not that I don't understand it, but we need someone experienced in dealing with the state. I wouldn't know the best approach, which could put us at a disadvantage." "Would you be willing to work with me if we find someone else to join the case?" I asked. "What you've shown so far looks promising, but anyone we approach will want much more evidence before they will consider it." "Who are you thinking of?" Carson replied. "The insurance company's asset recovery division, after we settle my father's claim," I said. "I'm sure they'll be interested since they will also have something to gain. The state will likely try to delay things as long as possible, so it might be a tough sell, but it's worth a try," he said with a smile. "Now I see why you want a file under your father's estate. I will keep the copy you made, but I need you to go back and link everything with notes for the documents used. The court will ask for the originals when we go to trial. After this, I'm going to the courthouse to get records of the trial and stop by the state capitol to get the appeal documents on my way home," I said. "The next time I send information, it will come from my new home in Bellingham and will include scanned copies of the originals. By the time we are ready to file, I should be settled at my granddad's place." After that, we shook hands and left. As we were leaving, Dad's lawyer said, "I'll suggest we ask for court costs in the case when I approach the insurance company, with the understanding that they keep the first $2 million if we win." "That works for us," I replied. "Neither of us is in this for the money. If we lose, I'll cover your costs." We had just left the courthouse and paid for the documents to be sent to me when my granddad received a call from my grandmother. It seems my mother had found out that I was back in town and wanted to meet with me. I asked my granddad where would be a quiet yet public spot for a one-on-one meeting with my mom. He suggested Jackson City Park just as the sun was setting, since most people would be gone by then. When I got back to the farm, I called her, and we agreed to meet at 7:30 that night. I also called Tammy to plan our get-together after my meeting with my mother. Our first meeting in 5 years didn't go how my mother had imagined. By the time we finished, her view of me had changed quite a bit. She started by asking about what was in my father's will. I replied that I couldn't answer until the court case was over. I was surprised she didn't seem to know anything about it. She wanted to know what I was doing with my life, but I told her it was not her concern since I had declared my independence when I left. "Brandon," she said, trying to connect, "I didn't expect the outcome when I started the divorce. I was just trying to make sure I had control as we worked through it." "Mother." I replied, "I remember everything from the night Sparrow and Wren talked to you about your secret. I was sitting on the stairs, listening and writing it all down in what turned into my journal of our lives until I ran away." My mother's face went pale when she heard the truth she didn't know. I continued, "I think my father was at a disadvantage, and you took advantage of that to get what was important to him. I saw how easily you could sway my sisters to do what you wanted. There are whispers that you are planning to do it again with your new husband. I don't know if those rumors are true, but based on what I've seen, I wouldn't be surprised. Brandon, she started to say, but I interrupted her. This conversation is over because I'm not ready to forgive any of you for what you've done. With that, I walked away, leaving her sitting at the picnic table, and returned to my car. I still wonder if my mother was shocked that I called her out, or if it was because someone was finally holding her responsible. To me, the conversation could not have gone better. At that moment, I didn't realize that this short talk with my mother, whom I had lost respect for, would spark a series of small confrontations with her family, who thought I should just forgive and forget. Each time I would end it by saying, if she could do this to my father, she could do it to someone else. Thank you for your concern, but based on her past behavior, it's best she stays out of my life for my own well-being. Tammy texted me while I was driving to her place, saying her parents were waiting to meet me. I was ready for tough questions. Like many concerned parents, they had their concerns, and I answered them honestly to ease their worries. Her father listened as I shared what I had done during my time away and seemed impressed by my accomplishments in the last 5 years. They had heard about my father's trial, so I took the time to explain what I had learned since I got back. They didn't know that my father had won his appeal, or that I was starting a case regarding his accidental passing. As Tammy and I headed out, her parents thanked me nicely and said they looked forward to getting to know me. No sooner had we gotten in the car when Tammy said, "Thank you, Bran. You really impressed my parents. By being yourself, you showed them how mature you are. They didn't know your father had won his appeal, nor that you were seeking justice for what happened. I knew that to win their approval, I had to be open and honest. I felt I could trust them because I trust you," I replied. Usually, people have to earn my trust. If you think about it, all caring parents are the same when their child introduces someone new. Dad says his grandfather and great-grandfather lived life the same way, Tammy explained. Those who became friends with them saw how loyal they were. I think Dad sees a bit of them in you, and that means he won't be a problem. After my mother interviewed you the other night, I think a lot of her worries were eased tonight when you confirmed what I had been telling her. Validation comes when someone else backs up what you said, I explained. Most people will believe it until proven wrong. As we drove toward New City Jack's, a place that had been updated by new owners, I told her what had happened that day. "Will you ever give your mother and sisters another chance?" Tammy asked. "Maybe in time, once the lawsuit is settled," I explained. What I've seen in Seattle has shown me that some people in charge act in ways that hurt the community while pretending to care. Their words sound good, but their actions say otherwise. It's sad that people keep voting for the same kind of leaders, making life harder for themselves. Tammy was quiet for a moment, then said as I parked the car, "Your words made me think about my relationship with your sisters. Why didn't I see this before?" When we are surrounded by something all the time, it feels normal, even if it's not right. We often ignore it because it doesn't seem important enough, I replied. So until your mother and sisters face consequences, you won't be able to move on, Tammy stated. For 2 reasons. First, as I just explained, and second, by standing firm, I'm making sure my father has the last word. That will hit my mother hard when she figures out she won't have the final say, I said. Tammy caught my sarcasm and giggled. New City Jack's had changed a lot. It went from a simple student hangout to a trendy spot. From the lobby, you could choose left or right, depending on which band was playing. The 2 bars were back-to-back with doors on either side. It must have been soundproof since you couldn't hear one side from the other. Thankfully, Tammy decided to listen to a tribute band performing songs by Boston, one of her mother's favorites. Tammy found out right away that I was not a good dancer. We had a good time trying to learn together. After spending a couple of hours with her on Thursday night, I left the farm on Friday morning. I had a meeting with the investigators my father had hired from St. Louis at 9 o'clock. I had printed out some information about Judge Fiona Araceli that I found online. This information would help them with what they knew. They told me they would start by getting a copy of the marriage certificate to find his legal name. After that, they would begin looking for him. Once I heard their rates, I paid a deposit of $5,000. Then I went to the courthouse in St. Louis to order a copy of my father's appeal transcript. I got back to my apartment on Sunday afternoon, shortly after noon. Driving home felt good because I was at peace with my life. I had done what I needed to do and reconnected with the people who mattered to me. Returning home gave me new insights, easing some doubts I had. I felt that my choices were validated. Now it was time to return to my regular routine until I was ready to make my next big move in life. Tammy and I talked for hours on the drive back to Bellingham. We discovered more about each other than we expected. Our conversations helped us understand each other's perspectives better. What we learned helped strengthen our growing relationship. The honest talks we shared that weekend seemed to bring us closer. By the end, we agreed to find a way to spend each long weekend together. As I entered Bellingham, I realized how much my trip had changed me. For the first time in my young adult life, I considered someone else's feelings when making decisions because I finally had a real girlfriend whom I could trust. I also felt I had a new purpose and direction in my life that I was excited about. Getting my MBA would be a wonderful boost to my career plans thanks to my father's support, which had given me many opportunities. The first thing I did after getting back to Bellingham was stop at the local Walmart photo department. I chose 6 of my favorite photos from my phone and had them printed as 8 by 10 images. One of my favorites was a picture of Tammy from the welcome home party, taken just after she had jumped into the pond to cool off. The picture captured her joy perfectly. Using photo editing software, I made sure the details stood out well. That Sunday evening, a few friends came over to welcome me back home. After enjoying some pizza and drinks, most of them left, leaving just Briley and me. Briley Soon is a second-generation Korean-American whose grandparents immigrated during the Korean War. She was studying full-time at university to earn a degree in science. She was bright and could communicate well with people, even if they didn't have her level of knowledge. I told her I believed she would succeed in research and development, but I advised her to communicate simply with those funding her work. I explained that people often spoke to others assuming they understood everything when they might not. Briley noticed my new attitude around women. "Brandon," she started, "something has changed about you while you were away. You seem more at ease with yourself, and we're here alone in your apartment, which is a first. What happened? You seem different, softer somehow. What made you drop that protective wall we all put up?" Without saying anything, I went upstairs and grabbed the pictures I had printed earlier. I handed them to her and said, "This is someone I knew before I moved west." Briley took her time looking through the pictures. She started with the one of Tammy and me at Dairy Queen, then looked at the rest and said, "She's a nice woman and you seem comfortable with her. What's the story?" "We grew up near each other and reconnected when I was back home," I explained. "She was close to my sisters before they started making life difficult for us." "So, what's her name? Or are you going to keep it a secret?" she asked, giggling. "Her name is Tammy Press, and I had quite a crush on her when I was a teenager," I said. "She was someone who helped keep peace between my sisters and me during the chaos we often created. To be honest, she is very different from my mother and sisters. I didn't really understand why she spent time with them because she is nothing like them. My grandmother says she has a kind heart. What I didn't know then was that she felt the same way about me." Bri looked at me with a new understanding, as if she was seeing me for the first time. Finally, she said, "I get it. You're feeling the excitement of opening up to someone new. You trust her, and that's allowing you to let go of some of the heaviness you usually carry." I was surprised that Bri could explain my feelings in such a clear way. We talked for a long time about my trip back home. Bri eventually said, "Your family situation is really messy, but I believe you will find a way through it. Don't let the lawsuit take over your life. It could cost you more than you think. And don't let your family issues get in the way of the new relationships you're forming. If it feels like something you need to fix, remember that even if you do, it may not bring you the happiness you want." Her honest thoughts led us to discuss how I see people in general. It was well past midnight when she finally left. Before she went, she added, "With Tammy, remember that your openness is what brought you two together. Don't let family problems change that. Tonight, you seemed more open and honest than before. It only makes our friendship stronger." Briley's words kept me awake for a long time. She was right. I usually kept my feelings to myself. I realized that after everything I had been through, I had lost some trust in others. The next morning, when I got to the store, the first thing I did was inform the shipping department about some documents I expected. They asked if the packages would have my name on them. I confirmed it would be sent with this address. Then I began reviewing what had happened while I was away to get ready for the work week. I was frustrated that we hadn't set up the signs for the latest promotion, so I focused on getting that done. At the start of the week, I usually held an informal meeting with the 4 mechanics, 2 apprentices, and the sales team for the day shift. This was to highlight the tasks ahead of us. They noticed I seemed more relaxed, which they hadn't seen before. As soon as we opened the doors, the phones started ringing, indicating a busy day ahead. The last weekend's newspaper ad had sparked interest in our tire sale. For every set of tires sold, we checked if a wheel alignment was needed and also looked at their braking systems. By suggesting additional services, we not only helped our customers, but also boosted our sales, which were above target for the quarter. We were one of the few stores that stayed open until 6 in the evening. When I finally took my lunch break, we were fully booked for the week. I used that time to ensure we had enough supplies to avoid any slowdowns. Since pricing was based on the time required for jobs, shop workers could fit in smaller tasks to increase their daily earnings. They all knew that cutting corners could lead to serious consequences. Around 10:30, my notification tone startled me. I checked it and saw a text from Tammy. It read, "It looks like someone saw us together. David's wife called asking why I was with you instead of Gary." I replied, "Not surprising, I'm busy at work. I'll call when I get home." Finally, around 3 that afternoon, I got to take a break. I went to the restaurant for a hot dog and a coffee. Just as I sat down with my order, the store manager spotted me and joined me. "I see you got your department back in shape quickly," he said, as he took a seat across from me. "Did your trip back home go better than you expected?" "Kind of," I answered. "It's complicated due to the legal issues from my father's passing, which will take time. Overall, though, it was better than I thought." "Did everything get sorted out with your family?" he asked. "Let's just say everyone knows where I stand now. They might not like it, but at least it's clear," I replied. "Then how come you're smiling?" "That's not something I usually see," he chuckled, noticing my mood. "Something good must have happened." "I think it's because I reconnected with some old friends," I said. "They really made my time at home enjoyable. An extra benefit is that when everything is settled, I will have inherited the family farm." "I don't know much about farming, but I've heard it can be a good way to make a living if someone really wants to work at it," he replied. "I know the basics," I said, not wanting to share too much. During my summers at my grandfather's farm, I learned a bit until I was old enough to help at my father's tractor dealership. I didn't know Dad had bought it when my grandfather decided to retire. "So, what's your plan now?" he asked. "In my free time, I'm putting together all the documents for my father's lawyer before we go to court," I said. "We can't settle the estate until that civil case is wrapped up. I also want to let you know I met someone at home and we hope to see each other on long weekends." "If any other department head asked for that, it would be a no," he said. "But while you were gone for 2 weeks, your team did an amazing job thanks to your training. There was no drop in sales, which is impressive. We'll look at your staffing schedule, and if everything seems okay, I don't see a problem. Now tell me about her." My lunch break turned out to be longer than half an hour. I opened my photo file to show him the pictures I had taken. Arlie Richards was quite curious and wanted to know all about my new friend. By the time we finished, I knew his wife, Kirsten, would hear all about it before the night was through. He asked me to make sure to bring Tammy over for dinner when she visits, so they could satisfy their curiosity. It was around 8 p.m. my time and 10 p.m. in Missouri when I finally called Tammy. It sounded like my Uncle David's wife, Sheila, was a bit nosy. She had made a big deal out of things and thought Tammy was sneaking around behind her son's back. Sheila was frustrated that her son and Tammy weren't settling down and wanted them to take life more seriously. The main thing was, she wanted grandchildren soon. Tammy told me she had to hold her tongue because she wanted to tell Sheila that her son was gay. I reminded her that even if she did, Sheila would probably not believe her and find another explanation for her son's actions. I told her how my first day back went, and that I got the green light to take the long weekends off. That was when we decided she should fly to Seattle for the next long weekend. About 3 weeks after I got back, some friends stopped by to check on me since I hadn't been around much. Between my schoolwork and the legal case, I was busy and didn't have time to socialize. I opened the door while I was on the phone with Tammy. When they came in, they saw my computer desk covered in papers and files. I told Tammy to let them know she was looking forward to meeting them in a few weeks. This led to many questions about what I was working on. I explained that I was slowly putting together a legal case. Everything had to be double-checked with original documents, so I had a coding system to make it easy for others to find the information when needed. Sometimes this meant I had to collect a lot of similar paperwork to strengthen what I already had. Briley joked, "That's the excuse Brandon's using. If we looked at his phone records, I'd bet he's been on the phone a lot with someone special." I laughed and replied, "With the time difference and everything going on, the actual time for talks is pretty limited." Briley smiled and quickly said, "When you're feeling this way, it's funny how you suddenly have all the time in the world for that special person. I'm surprised you all haven't noticed the new pictures Brandon has up." Suddenly, everyone was looking at the framed pictures I had placed around my apartment. "Who is she?" Timmy asked. "Where did you meet her?" "Her name is Tammy Press," I explained. "I've known her for years. I was talking to her when I answered the door, and you all will meet her when she comes out for the Labor Day weekend." "Oh, wow," said Charlene, Timmy's girlfriend. "Brandon's finally got a girl who's really caught his eye. So Brandon, give us the details and grab us something to drink." As I started mixing us all drinks, Charlene commented, "She's a lovely girl, Bran, and it looks like she's just as interested in you as the pictures show." We stayed up late, agreeing that we'd go whale watching on the Sunday of her visit since Tim's father would let us use one of his boats if we covered the gas costs. I believe I answered all their questions, but the evening seemed to end with Charlene and Tim leaving. Just as Charlene said, "Bran won't admit it, but he's definitely in love." The sun was setting when I got to Seattle's SeaTac Airport to pick up Tammy. I was running short on time because I had to work late to make up for a long weekend I was taking off. I had promised to bring Tammy with me to my boss's Labor Day barbecue. After I parked my car and walked inside to meet her, I realized I had forgotten the yellow roses I'd bought for her. I was so excited to see her that I overlooked the flowers. I hurried back to the car to get them, worried I'd be late to greet her. I thought it was a bad start to our first weekend together, but luckily her flight was delayed a few minutes. Tammy walked through the gate wearing jeans and a big smile. She greeted me with warm hugs and kisses. After I gave her the flowers, we waited for her luggage. We chatted about her flight from St. Louis, and she mentioned that she forgot to eat out of excitement. Once we had her bags, I called the Space Needle to check for a dinner reservation and was able to secure one since they were open late. During dinner, I discovered that Tammy was afraid of heights. She liked to look at the city lights from a distance, but didn't want to look straight down. She took a few semi-professional photos during our meal, telling me it was a hobby she hoped to share with others one day. On the drive back to my apartment, we caught up on family news. It seemed everyone back home had heard I was moving back to run my grandfather's farm. My mom and sisters were curious about my plans, suspecting I had something on my mind. My Aunt Sheila was asking Tammy and her son Gary about their intentions, too. Tammy mentioned that Gary was thinking of visiting his great-uncle in California, where he'd feel accepted. I shared that my grandmother was aware of both Gary's and Tammy's brothers' situations. I smiled when Tammy said, "She always knew, which is why she pointed me toward you when you came home. She wanted us to be together." "It seems my grandmother has been matching people up for a long time," I replied. "The only one she didn't match was my dad. She felt his choice wasn't right." On the way to Bellingham, I told Tammy about my plans for her visit, and she was excited about going whale watching. She was surprised when I stopped in front of my apartment in a 6-place building. The building had 6 apartments, each with 2 floors. The first floor had the living room, kitchen, dining area, and a small bathroom, while the second floor had 2 bedrooms and a regular bathroom. When I first saw it, the real estate agent said all the appliances were included, but one of the other renters told me they needed to supply their own washer and dryer. It turned out the previous owner didn't tell the truth about that. The lights from my car showed her the white siding with black trim of the building. I explained that the two units were mirror images of each other and that the walls were soundproofed for more privacy. Tammy seemed impressed that each unit had its own backyard. I took her luggage to the spare bedroom, which was ready for her. "I see you're considering the future here," Tammy said with a smile, "but I have to tell you what my mom did before my flight." I looked at her, curious as I placed her bags on the bed. She gave me some morning-after pills. "It looks like you'll be taking those back," I replied, adding, "When I get married, I don't want anyone questioning if it was planned. My oldest sister was born just 6 months after my parents got married, and we still wonder if their marriage was out of love or circumstance." Tammy's reaction surprised me. I thought she'd picked up on that already. "I thought you knew," I said. "Honestly, I knew their anniversary, but I never put it together because I didn't know the year they married," she replied. "But I see your point. I'd love to return them to my mom since she didn't want me to come here at all. Most people dislike it when their assumptions are challenged. When you give them back, tell her you felt she trusted you but had doubts about me and wanted you prepared," I said. "That way, we build a foundation of trust." Tammy laughed and said, "My mom has always worried I might be influenced by some people I know. To her, my taking this trip just confirmed her fears. Some people said negative things about others based on their families. My dad told her that running away from home was tough, but that it showed you could still make something of your life. He believed you deserved a chance, and that's why he supported us being together." I watched a movie about a father looking for his daughter who got mixed up in a bad crowd, I shared. At the end, he finds her again, but the person I watched it with and I disagreed on whether she would go back with him. We both saw her actions and body language in very different ways. Tammy took a moment to think and said, "It's interesting how a small thing like that can show just how different our thoughts can be if we actually try to see things from all angles before judging. It takes time to really understand someone's long-term behavior, and society often doesn't value that," I replied. After calling it a night, I went downstairs to lock up the place before returning to my room. On Saturday morning, I was at my computer preparing some documents for the lawyer. I had created a labeling system for the files, similar to how a library works. It had been 6 weeks since I returned from my trip home, and besides my studies, this was what kept me busy. When I heard Tammy moving around, I went to make some coffee. Seeing Tammy enter the kitchen in her pajamas and slippers was a moment I would always remember. She looked so relaxed. I was already dressed and ready to go. I poured 2 cups of coffee and asked if she would like sausage, fried potatoes, and an omelet for breakfast. She agreed, but said she would start cooking after her first cup. While she settled in the nook, I took some cold potatoes from the fridge and cut them up for frying. I also took 6 eggs out so they could warm up a bit before cooking. Tammy noticed my computer was on and asked, "What are you working on, if you don't mind me asking?" "I'm making a timeline of the events that led to my father's tragic death," I told her. "Feel free to look at it, just don't delete anything by mistake." Tammy started reading while I chopped the vegetables for the omelets and grated some cheese. I also prepared some frozen cheese biscuits in the air fryer. Tammy was so focused on what she was reading that she jumped when I said, "Breakfast is ready." The omelets were a big hit. I made them with cheddar cheese, bits of peppers, onions, bacon, and ham. They were fluffy because I added a bit of baking soda. I also warmed some salsa for her to add if she wanted. The sausage was special because a local butcher made it with his own spices. Tammy said they tasted much better than store-bought. The hash browns were crispy, golden, and buttery. We made so much that we couldn't finish it all. "I'm surprised by what I've read," Tammy said. "Some of it I didn't realize." "I wondered about that too," I said. "We tend to expect the best from our loved ones, and sometimes their goals seem impossible. My dad couldn't accept things until they were proven true, and he had doubts." "I understand," Tammy replied. "We all believe in what we think we know. I get why Gary wants to move. If he came out to his family, some people wouldn't believe him. Others might say I pushed him into it, and some would say they knew all along. Sadly, people never understand what truly shapes a person. When you realize that many people only see what they want to see, regardless of the truth, you start to see how little real truth exists," I explained. "That's why I take what most people say with caution. Until they prove what they say, I don't take their words seriously." If Gary moves to California, it might be better for him to create some reasons for his family. That way, everyone might think he left because of a heartbreak. That makes sense about why some of your family saw you as distant, Tammy said. Your grandmother thought it was time that changed you, but now I understand it was from lessons learned. I'm going to text Gary about your idea because it seems like a good way to keep everything clear and protect his relationships. What do you have planned for us today? I asked. If you're interested, I thought we could take a 4-hour bike ride on the mountain trail at Galbraith Mountain. I think the beginner route would be perfect since this is a new experience for both of us. We'll get to see some amazing views of Bellingham Bay, the Chuckanut Mountains, and the beautiful rainforests, along with all the wildlife we might encounter. If we leave at 9, we will be back by around 4. Once we're done, we can relax for a bit and then check out some local museums after dinner. Tomorrow, a few of my friends will join us for some whale watching on the Pacific Ocean and maybe a little fishing, I explained. Hopefully, we can catch some salmon to enjoy a nice meal on one of the small islands before heading back. It will give us a new view of the coastline. I also hope we'll have time to pick up some fresh king crab to cook for dinner. I'm glad I was ready for anything, Tammy said with a smile. I even brought my semi-professional camera to take pictures of our adventures. I can't wait to taste some seafood that's fresh from the ocean. If it had been spring, I would have taken you out to catch herring so you could try the roe without it costing a lot from a store or restaurant, I said. We could set up nets along the shore to catch them. It's quite a sight since big ships come from Japan to buy the catch from local fishermen. The First Nations people put cedar branches along the shore where the herring lay their eggs so they can collect them and cook them right there. They're really tasty with butter, salt, and pepper, I explained. That's one of the blessings of living on the coast. I've been exposed to things I wouldn't have experienced back home. It's similar to how southern food like ham hocks and white beans is special for us. My friend Timmy, who is First Nation, has helped me learn about their culture. Watching Tammy as she took in the beauty of the Northwest was a joy. The photos she captured were outstanding, showing a unique way of seeing the world. Her artistic style was fresh and original, with angles and perspectives that brought the scenery to life in ways I hadn't noticed. After taking a few pictures, she would share them with me on her camera's screen. The beginner tour did wear me out since I hadn't been on a mountain bike in years. However, we looked good compared to others in the group. As we headed back to my car, Tammy said, "It's sad that none of my photos can really capture the beauty of experiencing it for the first time. No picture can truly show what it feels like. To really appreciate everything, you need to see the same places through different seasons," I replied. When I began doing that, I was amazed by how special nature is. It made me think about how the Earth seems too complex to have happened by chance. I never thought of that, but you're right, Tammy said. The view of Bellingham Bay from up high will definitely be one of my favorite memories. On the drive back, we talked about our adventure, and Tammy marveled at the beautiful scenery and how clean everything was. Most of her family vacations were abroad, so this was a new experience for her. Should I plan a weekend trip to one of the ski resorts nearby? I started skiing with some friends once we all had cars, but I'm still a beginner, I suggested. We can rent equipment if you want to give it a try. I think that would be fun, since it's something I've never done before, Tammy said. Does this mean you won't be moving back until after the year ends? I spoke to my grandparents about how long it's taking me to finish my plans. They believe I'm making great progress, but think moving back would slow me down with distractions. They expect me home for Thanksgiving, so I suggest we coordinate with them to avoid causing any issues for our families. My sisters are starting to ask about my father's estate, and we decided it's best for me to return in time for the new growing season. Do you hope to finish everything before you move back? Tammy asked. That's the plan, I answered. How about a meal where you can try the best foods from the Pacific Ocean? Tammy agreed, and I took her to a restaurant where we had a small view of the bay. It was a delight watching her enjoy the fresh seafood we had caught earlier. I smiled when she exclaimed, I can't believe how fresh everything tastes. If we lived here, I would eat this all the time. In Missouri, seafood is either frozen when it arrives or is farm-raised, I explained. Both methods seem to change the taste a bit. Fish that's farm-raised can sometimes be soft when cooked because it might have parasites, I explained. It's like when people see a rare steak, they think the red liquid is blood, but it's just tissue from the cooking process. Tammy asked our server if she would take a few pictures of us while we ate. She agreed and took 3 nice shots with her camera. As we were leaving, I remembered there was a rock and roll concert at Elizabeth Park featuring local musicians. We stopped at a nearby store to grab some drinks and snacks, then drove over to enjoy the music under the stars. What started as a surprise turned into a wonderful night. The crowd was cheerful, and the event went on longer than expected. To celebrate the end of summer, they ended with a small fireworks display as the band played a lively version of the national anthem. Tammy managed to capture some fun photos of the bands and the audience. It was almost 1 a.m. when we parked in front of my apartment. Tammy looked at me with a tear in her eye and said, "I think this day will always stay with me. I saw a side of you I hadn't noticed before. The way you helped that older couple on the bike tour showed a kindness that not many see. Your patience today surprised me, and it shines through in everything you do." "I had to learn to be patient," I replied. "When I first came to the West Coast, I was angry about the things I witnessed. If it weren't for Timmy showing me their culture and values, I would be a different person. I never realized how deeply they appreciate and understand the environment around them." We shared a glass of wine and enjoyed a moment together before calling it a night. On Saturday morning, we headed to Squalicum Harbor, located near downtown Bellingham. It was a place filled with over 1,400 boats. On one side were commercial vessels, while the other was for pleasure. Tammy was amazed by what she saw. With crab traps stacked high and large fishing boats she recognized from TV, she spent a lot of time with her camera. We explored the Bellingham dockside market for about an hour, admiring the fresh seafood offered by local fishermen. The experience of watching local fishermen sell their fresh catch was something Tammy would always remember. By the time we finished, the rest of our group was starting to arrive. Since we agreed to meet at 10, we made our way to Timmy's father's boat after picking up a fishing license for Tammy. Timmy's father, a leader in the Lummi Nation, managed a fleet of boats for whale watching and sport fishing in the Pacific Northwest. Each boat came with a crew of 4 and had all the necessary gear. He also served on the board for the Northwest Indian College and helped run a large hotel and casino on the reservation. Tammy was surprised as we approached the big boat. When the crew saw us, they unfurled a large welcome banner for her. After introductions, we set sail towards an area where several whales had been spotted. Suddenly, the Canadian Coast Guard pulled up alongside us. I explained that we had crossed the border and were now in their waters. They wanted to ensure we were not fishing illegally. It was exciting to learn that 2 pods of whales were seen in international waters southeast of Victoria. With their permission, Tammy could document the moment with some photos. Charlene, Briley, and Tammy began to bond. I discovered that Timmy's older brother liked Briley, but she was focused on her dreams and hadn't noticed. I suggested he start a conversation with her about his study on how changing ocean currents affect the Northwest. I knew Briley was passionate about climate issues, and while debates with her could go in circles, once he started talking about their shared interests, they connected well. I thought their relationship would grow until he understood more about her views. It took us about an hour to reach the area where the whales were spotted. The crew slowed the boat to move quietly, not to scare the whales. It was worth it, as we were soon treated to a wonderful display. We were lucky to see small pods of humpbacks teaching their young some acrobatics for about half an hour. Tammy took over 100 pictures. Later, as she reviewed her photos, she noticed there were dolphins swimming with the whales. It was a joy to watch someone experience such a natural wonder for the first time. Tim pointed out to Tammy which were boys and girls when he had the chance. Once we were back in American waters, the strong fishing rods came out for us to try deep-sea fishing for the first time. The crew took us to a spot where they thought we might catch some Chinook salmon. It took us about 4 hours, but each of us caught at least 1 fish. Most of the fish were released, but we kept 3 for anyone who wanted to take one home. It was nice to see Tammy give each salmon a hug before we left the boat when we returned to the dock. Tammy and I walked to the dockside market and bought 3 king crabs and 2 lobsters from the boats that had just arrived. After we got back to my car, we put the packages filled with water into the cooler. Next, we stopped at a grocery store for side dish ingredients. While we were driving back to my place, Tammy's mom called. I listened to her side of the conversation as she spoke on the phone. Tammy mentioned that her mom seemed surprised by what we had been doing. Tammy began preparing the salad while I cleaned and cut the salmon. Some parts of the fish were wrapped for freezing later, but I kept a few sections for the dinner we had planned. She watched as I filled 2 big pots with water and added salt. While waiting for the water to boil, I melted some butter. Tammy poured us each a glass of white wine from northern Italy. It surprises people to see that the freshly caught lobster and crab are still alive when they go into the boiling water. Those who see it for the first time often react strongly. Tammy was one of them. She was amazed at how easily I showed her how to get the meat from the seafood and liked that we had melted butter for dipping. When she asked how I learned to cook seafood, I explained that I learned from friends who are part of the First Nations. After we finished eating, feeling very full, my cousin Gary called me. I put the call on speaker to include Tammy. It turned out that my Uncle David and Aunt Sheila had heard from Tammy's mom that she was visiting me. "I'm not surprised," Tammy said. "My mom doesn't think your cousin comes from a good background because of his family's issues. She did this on purpose. She's trying to create a situation that will force me to break up with Brandon so we can be serious. I told my parents I let you go, which started a big family discussion," Gary added. "When they asked why, I finally found the courage to say it was because of friendship. You agreed to help me because I couldn't tell them I was gay. By the time we talked, my dad was accepting it, but my mom was not. Thanks to my grandma, I'm moving to Lodi, California, where her brother offered to let me stay until I get settled. Do you need a couple of $1,000s to help with your move? I can give it to Tammy to pass on to you if you do," I offered. My grandma and I talked a lot while getting the house ready for remodeling. I don't know how she knew, but with her help, I asked about a transfer at Home Depot. I'm downsizing, and what's left will fit in a U-Haul trailer. They even offered me a better job because of my skills and recommendations. I start in 2 weeks. I'm sending the money with Tammy anyway as a gift because I feel partly responsible for your situation," I said. "Thanks, but it's not necessary. I'm just relieved to have this behind me. I don't want to keep living a lie. The reason I'm calling is that my dad told me my mom called Tammy's mom asking what awful things her daughter has done to me over the years," Gary explained. "She doesn't believe Tammy had nothing to do with it." "When did this all come up?" Tammy asked. "I just left my parents' house because they need time to adjust. My dad texted me about my mom's reaction, so I pulled over to call and prepare you both," Gary replied. "I'll pick up the trailer on Wednesday and leave next Saturday." After we ended the call, we waited for the call we expected, but it never came. Tammy said, "Maybe my mom is trying to figure out how to deal with what she learned before she talks to me. I think once I move back, we should fly out to visit my great-uncle and Gary to show our support," I suggested, because Gary depends more on family than I do. Tammy was quiet for a moment, making me wonder if I had upset her or if it was the situation. But she surprised me by saying, "You learned from your father to rely on yourself. Gary, like me, was taught that family is always there to support us. He will be feeling lost for a while due to changes happening with his family. His connections with most of them will need time to adjust until everything gets back to normal. Maybe we should check in on him once we know he feels comfortable. It helps explain why you seem so confident in everything you do. People have asked how you manage to achieve so much when others we know are still figuring things out. It comes down to how we were raised. You were better prepared for life's responsibilities than I was." "My father taught me essential skills when I was a teenager," I said, "but I didn't realize how valuable they were until I had to use them in real life. I learned to appreciate less because I had to leave behind some things I once cherished. In a way, this turned out to be a blessing. Now, I don't see my worth in material possessions." "Timmy and I had a chance to chat today," Tammy said. "He mentioned that you both spent hours discussing how people relate to the earth. He enjoyed seeing you engage with this topic. He realized that your connection to nature was more spiritual than a mere cultural practice." "I owe some of that understanding to my grandfather," I replied. "He always said that if you take care of the land, it will take care of you." Timmy helped me connect to it in a more meaningful way. I saw how their respectful practices benefited both the soil and the environment. For instance, the city of Cape refurbishes its sewage systems every January. During this process, they dispose of clean sludge at a high cost. My grandfather used to leave a part of his land untouched for a year, just like the traditions from the Old Testament. Knowing this, I've spoken with the sanitation department. They agreed to spread the sludge in the area we plan to set aside so I can mix it in before planting clover. This will help improve the soil by adding nourishment before I plant again. I didn't realize growing up that we often misuse the things we have, I explained. We call it wear and tear because we overuse them, but really we're too busy with life to take care of them. Instead of fixing small problems, we let them grow. The same often happens with how we treat the earth. Many farmers spend lots of money on chemicals to get bigger harvests, which can lead to uncertain results. Being young gives me the chance to explore what nature offers without rushing for quick results. Tammy looked at me differently, as if she was starting to understand. Your thoughts apply to many relationships. We often hold on to things to avoid conflict, but that just makes it harder in the long run. Realizing this helped me see that ignoring issues only leaves them unresolved for later. I stepped closer to Tammy and held her gently. Let's promise to always feel safe sharing our feelings with each other. It's a great idea, but it may be tough to follow, Tammy said. We often let things go for love. When you returned home, I could see how much you had changed. Yet every time we're together, you show me a new perspective. I realize that what I knew about you growing up has evolved because you've shown a deeper understanding of what matters. I appreciate your honesty. It is bringing us closer. Just as we were getting ready to share a tender moment, her phone rang with a call from her mother. Tammy answered and put it on speaker. I just finished talking with your boyfriend's grandmother, Tammy's mother said. It was quite an enlightening conversation. After I expressed my frustration with her for not sharing what she knew, she put me in my place and shared insights about her life. I learned that I was confronted by Gary's mother regarding your relationship because she was trying to understand what might have influenced him. She seemed to think you had changed his perspective on things. My husband accepted his sexuality, but I have struggled with it because I believe he created a story that helped him cope with what your daughter has done. What did she do? She told me it was because she ended things with him for his cousin. Without Brandon's grandmother's wisdom, this would have been a different conversation. My question is, why didn't you tell me? Mom, I've known since before we graduated elementary school. He told me his story because he needed someone he could trust to explain why he didn't date much. When his family started pressuring him, we created a pretend relationship to stop their questions. As friends, I felt I had to keep his secrets. The good part was that it let me date others without anyone thinking it was serious. Gary helped Brandon and me realize our feelings for each other from when we were younger. He said we'd be foolish not to see if it could lead somewhere, Tammy explained. Gary also told me that he warned Brandon to treat me well. There was a short, quiet moment. I could tell Tammy's mom was taking in everything she'd learned. I'm in total shock, her mother finally said. I can't believe how wrong I was. Now I see why you were so excited when Brandon returned. I thought you were trying to push Gary into something. I see now that Brandon was being honest, and what I learned from his grandmother confirmed much of it. Mom, just so you know, the things you gave me before I left will be returned when I come back, Tammy said. This is mainly because Brandon doesn't want anyone questioning why he got married just 6 months after his sister was born. After a moment of silence, her mom continued. Your father and I faced similar pressure when we were your age. His parents insisted we marry before anything unexpected happened. We took their advice too seriously and rushed things before we were ready. Please let Brandon know I was mistaken, and I'm looking forward to getting to know him better. You don't have to tell him. I heard everything, I said. Please don't feel embarrassed. I question things too until I figure them out. When I come home for Thanksgiving, could you help arrange things with my grandparents so that Tammy and I won't cause any issues? She agreed and ended the call. I could tell she felt awkward. I poured more wine, thinking that Tammy could use some time to process everything. Suddenly, she started laughing. Mom wasn't worried about us. She expected we'd act like they did when they were young. She just wanted to make sure we had everything we needed. When I get home, I'll tease her about it for weeks. Just be gentle with her, I suggested. Parents often see their kids as smaller versions of themselves and sometimes act that way, even if they won't admit it. My grandmother pointed that out during my last visit, sharing examples of how it showed in her life. Tammy and I settled on the sofa to watch something on TV, and we both agreed that reality shows weren't for us. We didn't want to see people's personal lives on display. Before we left my apartment, we put her suitcase in the car so we could go to SeaTac Airport for her flight at 5. We stopped by the harbor to grab some fresh seafood and then headed to Arilee and Kristen Richards' house for an early Labor Day barbecue. I was surprised to find that only the department heads and their families were invited, yet many people were already there. Tammy quickly became the center of attention since no one had seen me with a girl before. Kristen and Tammy hit it off immediately, and I couldn't help but smile when I overheard Arilee mention that if Bo Derek and Tammy were the same age, it would be quite the competition. Soon enough, we had to leave to catch Tammy's flight, but not before she learned how I knew the Richards. I made a quick stop on the way to buy a box of smoked salmon for her to take home. I felt a bit sad as I watched her plane fly away. The week after the Labor Day weekend began to bring things together. I was already up when I received a call from a detective agency in St. Louis. They informed me they had their first report on Judge Fiona Araceli and would send it via email along with their bill. I told them I'd look it over after work and might need more help depending on what I found out. It was tough to focus because I just wanted to go home. As soon as I did, I turned on my computer and printed the report. The more I read, the more I believed my suspicions were correct. Juan Hosea Lopez married Fiona Carmen Araceli in 1994, and they divorced 10 years later due to abandonment. After less than 6 years and 3 daughters, he had gone missing. Neighbors thought he was a kind and helpful person, while she seemed driven and had what they considered an impossible agenda. This led to them seeing some very public arguments between the couple, which made them think there were serious issues beneath the surface. 3 major points stood out. The first thing noted was that no tax papers had been filed in the U.S. or Mexico since the year before Juan disappeared. The second point was that during this time, none of his credit or debit cards had been used or canceled. This was a big sign that something was wrong. It was also discovered that there were no unusual cash withdrawals from his accounts, which suggested that whatever happened was unexpected. Juan had grown up in Coatepec, a small Catholic village known for its shade-grown coffee and beautiful orchids. The town had a charming colonial style that was well cared for. His parents were alive but had left their coffee farm to Juan's 6 siblings. They, too, had no idea where Juan was, but held hope that if he was alive, they would have heard from him. When Fiona and Juan met, he was running a successful import-export business focused on coffee, along with his 2 brothers. They had a traditional Mexican wedding in his hometown. After he went missing, it seemed that Fiona cut all ties with his family. 6 months later, she sold their house for less than what it was worth. This felt suspicious to me. It suggested she didn't want to deal with questions from his family. It made me wonder if she sold the house because she believed he would never return. At the time he disappeared, they didn't have any debts and owned several large apartment buildings, making it hard to understand why he would leave, as she implied. Fiona also had been in a long-term relationship with a woman named Tegan Ella Stevens, who started as their nanny and was now a lawyer in Missouri. I found myself questioning if Tegan was their nanny before Juan disappeared. Tegan was an immigrant from Spain who came to the U.S. on a work visa. She was known for being outspoken and had come out as a lesbian while studying. I decided to use online methods to pay for services using some money I had from selling Bitcoin my dad had left me. I asked to find out more about the relationship between Fiona and Tegan. I also requested a list of unidentified bodies of Mexican descent found in the Mississippi River from 2 years before and after Juan's disappearance, focusing on the states along the river down to the Gulf of Mexico. Additionally, I wanted to get blood samples from Juan's family, so if we found a body that resembled him, we could determine if it was him or not. Having lived near the Mississippi, I understood that how much rain there was could change the river's behavior. The biggest worry was flooding, which could expose hidden remains as waters receded. The river had a way of bringing things to the surface, and I felt deep down that we might be looking for a body, leading to the conclusion that Juan's death was no accident. After emailing the detective agency, I reached out to my father's lawyer, asking him to buy Fiona and Juan's old home if it came up for sale. I also requested he try to get the house's original blueprints and sent him a file with all the information I had put together concerning my father's timeline, hoping it was enough to start the process. I was about to grab something for dinner when my phone buzzed. It was Tammy. She told me that Wren, Sparrow, and my mother had visited her at work because they heard we were in a serious relationship. The conversation hadn't gone well. Tammy made it clear that our relationship was not for them to discuss. "They're worried about something, or they wouldn't have come," Tammy said. "Wren was trying to use some of the tricks we learned as teens to find things out without asking directly." I replied, "For many people, waiting for news can feel frustrating, especially when nothing seems to happen. I think not knowing what's in my father's will, except that he's suing the state, makes them curious about how much money my sisters will get when it's all settled," I said. "Do you think it's really that simple?" Tammy asked. "No, knowing my family, I think they are trying to find a way to reach me. They believe that if they make things hard for you, it will force me to contact them. The chief of police in Jackson mentioned they've been looking at my mother's side of the family because they often find ways around the law to make money." I then shared some new details I learned about the judge and her missing husband. She mentioned it might make an interesting one-hour documentary for TV. Little did she know, this idea opened up a new way for me to gather information that could help me. Gary had left for California, leaving behind a mix of strong feelings. He thought that being away would help settle things. Tammy said he seemed more at peace and had a new excitement for life that she hadn't seen in a long time. During her visit, Tammy and her mother had a long talk that brought them closer together through a better understanding of each other. I was happy to learn that when they talked about what we did while she was here, Tammy's mother realized I must have put a lot of thought into planning our weekend. "I feel like my mother is starting to see that we are building a strong relationship," Tammy said. "She said that the way you planned things showed you didn't need to be alone, even when you were by yourself." I was confused by that at first, but it made sense when I showed my parents the photos I took. Dad was impressed by how much we did in such a short time and suggested to Mom that they should explore their own area instead of always traveling far. We continued chatting for about another hour until I said I needed to go because my stomach was growling. Tammy laughed and admitted she forgot about the time difference. I was waiting for my connecting flight from Tennessee to Cape Girardeau. Because of the virus, flights from St. Louis had been cut down, which was frustrating. I was grateful for my job's holiday benefit, which allowed me to take time off for Thanksgiving. It also turned out to be on Tammy's birthday. About a month ago, her mother asked me if I could come home to surprise her. She thought it would mean a lot given how our relationship was growing. So I adjusted my schedule to be there when Tammy got home from work. I knew I had to explain to Tammy that I misled her because she thought I was flying in tomorrow. As I waited, I watched the local news. A reporter brought up the lawsuit my father's estate and the life insurance company filed against the state of Missouri. I was surprised they were asking for such a large amount, but then I understood they did this to give the judge or jury the freedom to decide the award if we won. The reporter explained why she believed the plaintiffs had a strong, wrongful death case. I could feel tension building because I knew everyone involved would soon be notified. 2 hours later, I stepped off the small plane and walked toward the sliding doors of the Cape Girardeau airport. I spotted my 2 grandparents waiting for me. After some warm greetings and collecting my bags, we drove home to the farm. During the ride, I learned they had finished remodeling the 2nd and 3rd floors while I was away. When I asked if the money I left was enough, they said there was still more than half left. Once we were home and settled, my grandmother handed me the keys to their 2004 PT Cruiser, which they had just had serviced. It was mine to use while I was there. "Brandon, we have a meeting with the lawyer on Monday at 9, my grandfather said. He'll update you on everything. It seems that what you sent him was enough for the life insurance lawyers to take on the case against the state. He will explain all the details then." "That's good to hear," I replied. While waiting for my flight, I saw it on the local news. I also have 3 discs with important documents to hand over to him. "Wow, they just filed the suit yesterday, so they had time to notify everyone over the weekend," my grandfather said. "Be careful, because once they know you've come back, things might get complicated." "It will be interesting to see what the Saturday morning paper says," said my grandmother as she got up to make tea. My grandfather and I then took a tour of the newly renovated floors. The 3rd floor now had a large bathroom with a big shower and relaxing tub. The master bedroom had 2 spacious closets. The 2nd bedroom was now my office, where my father's computer sat on a new oak desk. I noticed that all the windows had been updated too. The 4 bedrooms on the second floor were changed into 3, allowing them to create a second master bedroom. My grandmother converted one of the other bedrooms into a sewing and craft area, freeing up space on the first floor. This meant there would be room for an island in the new kitchen and a bigger living room when they remodeled. I discovered that she had persuaded Tammy to help choose the color schemes for the house, which now looked trendy. It also explained the new LED lights on the upper floors. At around 4:30, I headed toward Tammy's parents' home so I could be there when she finished work. When I arrived, I was surprised to find that they had decorated a big cardboard box for me to climb into before sealing it shut. As Tammy's co-worker called to say she was on her way, I crouched down inside, listening to the chatter while they wrapped the box up tightly. I had never experienced anything like it. I heard them lock the front door and turn off the lights, making me wonder how long I would wait for Tammy to come in and turn them back on. Finally, when she did, everyone shouted, "Surprise!" Tammy looked stunned because many of the girls she knew from school were there. Her father then addressed the crowd, saying, "Since my daughter started dating, I've been concerned about her finding someone special. I'm actually relieved she isn't married yet. This year, instead of a trip for her birthday, we decided to give her this surprise gift to encourage her to take the next step in her life." He added, "We all know she has high standards." This made everyone chuckle, and I found it amusing too. Then her father asked Tammy what she needed to open the box. "A knife to cut the tape would be nice," she replied, and he handed her a big knife. I could hear the sounds in the room as she carefully cut the tape. I wondered if I could trust her enough not to just stand up and get out of the box. I thought about it, but realized I might accidentally get hurt in the confusion, like an animal adjusting to being caged. "She's taking her time," one woman said. "She doesn't want to damage what's inside," another replied. They joked that maybe it was something she could use when she gets married. One of them mentioned that they wished Braden, someone Tammy often talked about, was there to see their connection. At that moment, Tammy had cut all the tape and was pulling off the wrapper to reveal a big dark sheet covering the object inside. I won't forget her expression as she pulled the sheet away and discovered me inside. Without my beard, I looked different, and to my surprise, she started tearing up as I stood up. Before I even got out of the box, she was hugging me. Tammy's mother then announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the man Tammy can't stop talking about, and she didn't expect him until tomorrow. I'm proud to introduce you to her boyfriend, Brandon. I heard Tammy's brother mention to his girlfriend that both our families believed we were a perfect match, and he referred to a misunderstanding involving his family and the state." I met Tammy's co-workers and their partners before she opened the rest of her birthday gifts. It was exciting to find out they had hired a service to set up a buffet. The food was great, with many guests going back for seconds. Tammy said she preferred my goatee and mustache over my full beard. As the evening went on, many extended family members introduced themselves to me. It wasn't until nearly 10 at night that the party began to wind down. Meanwhile, across town, my mother and 2 sisters were having a tough night as they received some unexpected news at their homes. Those who were married discussed what could happen if things didn't go well. At 10 o'clock, the 3 women and their husbands gathered at my mother's new house to plan their next steps. They decided to work together to save on legal fees and find services as a group to help them. Hey listeners, if you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.